going on, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of JaAR. JaAR, for those of you that may be new, stands for Joe
and Amy
Review, and this is our pseudo-weekly show, twice-weekly show at this point, where we are reviewing the Magic stories. And today we are back with another Dominaria United story, this time the first of the 5 side stories called Homecoming by Seanan McGuire. My quick review at the top of this one is, and I'm almost certain you're going to have a different take.
Okay.
This story is niche. And if you're a newer reader, you can still read the story and enjoy it. It was well written, but you don't need this story in any capacity. You just don't. It's a lot of... This story is a love letter to a particular kind of reader of the story, of the former Magic stories, and so I personally feel like if you're not among that group, this story is take it or leave it for you. But if you are among that group, it's absolutely a must-read. So if you're among the group that cares to know who the Raven Man is and knows who it actually ends up being, which means you would have had to have had knowledge of all the old Dominaria stories and etc. from the novel years and stuff like that, then yes, this is absolutely the story for you. You get to, if you ever had a theory on who it could possibly be and why, then this one's for you. I guess that's not much of a quick review, but that's what I feel. I feel like if you're not those people or not that person, then this one, while a well-written story and would be entertaining for you to read, it seems like this story would not be meant for you in particular, is my feeling on it. But...
my quick review is that I almost resent that this story is a side story. This story is the best story that we've read since, oh god, I can't even remember at this point. Probably Ixalan. I mean, literally, like you said, it's a love letter to people who cared about the story before. Mm-hmm. Before it basically turned to nonsense.
Okay.
So, it is a love letter to me, and I enjoy it.
And we will talk about how and why throughout the review, and that's the whole point. But if you are interested in reading the story for yourself,
I highly recommend it.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off entirely. I was literally about to ask if you were done with your full review, so thank you. So if you are interested based on that assessment and or my own, the top link in the description down below will take you to that story so that you can read it for yourself. We try to remove as many barriers as possible, so please feel free to go read that. And then, of course, whether you're going to go read it or not, we would love it then if afterwards you would come back here and join us with the continuation of this video.
Please.
And then last but not least, before we get started, I just want to thank you all for being here. Welcome to the channel. Hopefully you are enjoying all the things that we're doing here on this channel. We also have other channels in Video Games for All and Gluten Free for All. Those links are also in the description down below. And while you are on any of our channels, if you are enjoying what we're doing and you haven't already, please don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell so that you will get notifications whenever any of our videos come out. Don't forget subscribing on YouTube, totally free. Not a shade on Twitch, just reminding people, free on YouTube, paid on Twitch. They're different things. And so if you're not interested in continuing to be subscribed, there's no financial burden whatsoever to unsubscribe after the fact, but just wanted to remind you. And then also on this channel, every Monday and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, we are live streaming. Mondays, we play MTG Arena, typically whatever limited format happens to be around at the time. So recently we did the Cube Draft that just came out. And sometimes we do some viewer games of like Historic Brawl or Standard or whatever people really want to play. We can make things work. And then on Fridays, we play whatever video game we happen to be playing at the time. This Friday, we will be continuing our first ever Nuzlocke of Pokemon Fire Red. If any of that stuff sounds interesting to you, like I said, subscribe, ring the bell, And then we would love it if you would join us on those streams. As I said, Mondays, Fridays, 8 p.m. Eastern. We would love to have you.
Yeah.
But on to the full review itself. This is a Liliana story. This is a Ravenman story. I was a little annoyed. I guess I'm jumping right to the end because it was the most recent thing that we read. I'm a little annoyed that she pops in, fights like 6 Phyrexians, and then just leaves. Like, we're going to talk about if she's actually redeemed or not. We'll get into that. But, like, if she is, why wouldn't she stay and fight the Phyrexians? Like, she's got to get back to school? Like, that's more important than stopping a multiversal threat in the Phyrexians? I thought that was odd, and I don't think we're going to have answers to that in this set at all, because she's, like, going back to Strixhaven now.
I think she just felt like there wasn't that much more she could have done. Like, maybe she felt like, she couldn't actually, like, defeat the Phyrexians. Like,
I guess.
So she was just like, I have to, like, deal with this immediate threat and then, like, leave before I get hurt, basically.
Okay. And again, this may be something that you'll talk about later, but I wanted to bring up something that I thought was kind of funny at the beginning. Liliana mentions that Gavany on Innistrad, of all the places in all the planes in the multiverse, Innistrad, of all places, and Gavany specifically in Innistrad, is the place that she says, from her travels, that she has found to have the sweetest honey. Now, I thought to myself, you know, when you're on Innistrad, you're dealing with, and I wrote it down, vampires, werewolves, zombies, geists, Eldrazi, and more, like evil angels, etc. And even they, all of those things, creatures, abominations that we just mentioned, even they know you don't mess with bees. Just saying that, like, bees make awesome honey. So I wanted to point that out because I thought that was kind of cool. And Amy, as a bee lover, I thought might appreciate it. But anyway.
Thank you.
Yeah. Then I wanted to talk about some of the language that was used in the beginning of the story. Something that it kind of bothered me. So for folks who have not been following along with our show, did you want to do this on your own when you get to your section? How have you felt about Liliana recently, or do you want to do that on your own time?
Yes.
Okay. So we have talked a lot about characterization in general with recent Magic stories, right? So feeling that it's possible that the new story team doesn't get the characters as well as the original authors of them did, but, and that's, I guess, to a degree understandable, right? You're being given a character that someone else was writing for such a long period of time that, like, it's kind of understandable that you'd be like, I don't get it. Like, I don't see your vision for that character, but now I have to try anyway, right? So we have had issue on occasion with, like, okay, that doesn't seem like something Kaya would do, but I guess, you know, like something like that, along those lines. Or we're like, why is Chandra doing this? Why is Nissa doing this?
Right.
That kind of thing. So I found it interesting that one of the quotes that mentions, unless, the quote is, unless their travels, there being Will and Rowan Kenrith, unless their travels through the blind eternities brought them into contact with one of the people who blamed her, being Liliana, for everything she'd ever been adjacent to. And there's more to the sentence, but that's the relevant part. I was so frustrated by that because we've talked about the fact that it seemed like the story team was trying to say, listen, we like Liliana, she's great, strong female character, we want to use her, and so despite everything she's done in the past, prior to War of the Spark, we need her as one of our main female protagonists for our story. And so we are going to make her a tragic figure in the loss of Gideon and etc. And that she is, I guess, in situations like this, abused and manipulated by the Raven Man and blah, 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 ignoring the fact that she was instrumental in getting to where she is right now, I guess is the best way of putting it, right? She did that to herself. She did that to her friends in the Gatewatch members. And now she's just like, in her own mind, right? She's not talking to and convincing anyone but herself when she thinks, all right, well, the Kenriths know that I'm here. But as long as they don't blab to other people, it's fine, because they're not gonna run into any of the people who blame me for everything I've ever been adjacent to. So the language that is being used by her in her own mind is like pushing off responsibility. Well, it's not me. I'm adjacent to it. And people get upset with me for it, but it's not my fault. It's absolutely your fault in a lot of ways. And you can change as a person and try to move away from that. But in my opinion, that ain't the way to do it. To just be like, well, none of it's my fault. Like, accept responsibility. I was bothered by that. And then, again, the language that's being used, I think, to try to rewrite who she is and who she was. The next, or not the next line, but another line that I wrote down. She deserved so much worse than this. She deserved the dissolution that had fallen to her comrade being Gideon. So now she's saying, oh, woe is me, I deserve worse than I have right now. I deserve to be where Gideon was. So again, feel bad for me. And it's like, you just said it wasn't your fault. So it's not your fault, but it is your fault. But it's not your fault. But we know that it is your fault. So who are you convincing besides people who have not read these stories? The prior ones. Where you're like, oh, she's sad. She's had a bad life. Feel bad for her. Why? Like, and then later on, and you and I both had talked about this, because I don't think you're going to talk about this later. There's the line that again, this is all in her own mind. She's not saying this to anyone. But it just says, Liliana, greatest necromancer in the multiverse, leader of armies and conqueror of death itself. Again, who are you saying that to? Is that just what you call yourself in your own mind? Again, I guess maybe I'm not the one to speak on female empowerment and like positive self-talk, but like that feels like a lot. But okay, last thing I wanted to talk about before we get into what you have for us, because I desperately want to hear what you have to say on this one. I thought it was very interesting that Liliana, to find out information about who the Raven Man could possibly be, goes to the Biblioplex and finds a very, very ancient tome to read about who the Raven Man ends up being. And I'm being a little bit facetious about not saying his name yet. In case you don't want to be spoiled, you should go read the story to find out who the Raven Man is. They reveal it about halfway through, I would say. Maybe a little less than halfway through. But, and eventually we will say it. So just FYI, it's going to happen. But, you know, warning now. But I was like, yeah, that's what we're going to have to do to be able to like actually understand all of the backstory of who he is and who he was, is like find these ancient books. And of course, No offense to anybody. I don't mean that the early 90s is ancient times. We were alive then too. I'm just saying that, like, in terms of the stories that we're reading now, it feels like ancient history that from when these original stories occurred, where the Raven Man, as who he was prominently featured. So, okay.
Pushing it off to me?
Yeah, it's your turn.
This one?
Oh, I didn't. Look at that. We literally wrote like a little post-it note here for me to remember these other 2 points, and I was just going to skip right by it. Thank you, Amy.
You're welcome.
There was speculation that the Raven Man was in some way connected to the Chain Veil, right? Because he was the one who was often trying to manipulate or convince Liliana to use the Chain Veil, use its power, kill your enemies, or do this or that or whatever. Like, get rid of your demons, things like that. And so the quote that the Raven Man says to her is, "The chain of which I am a single link is too long and too powerful." Now, to the story's credit, by the end of the story explains why that line is there, because it's the chain of possession and resurrection and possession and etc. from one person to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next, and that's that chain of which he is a link of. And that he was trying to add Liliana as a link to that chain.
Right.
So we get that line now at the end, but earlier on it's, I think, could be looked at as like a nod to, oh, so you were part of the Chain Veil. No, he was not, but it's still that imagery of the chain made me think of that, and so it was something that I wanted to talk about and write down. And then I thought it was interesting, and I guess I'll say it now, so last warning. Once she is talking to the Raven Man and says, well, what of it, Limdull? Is it Limdull, Limdull? I am not familiar with the grammatical triangle above a vowel. I'm specifically you in this case. I'm not sure what that means for pronunciation, so I apologize. Limdull, Limdull, Lim something else. I have no idea. I'm going to say Limdull, but you are more than welcome to correct me in the comments down below. I would really appreciate new knowledge. That's kind of what we're going for here at all times. But when she says, okay, Limdull, what of it? And reveals that she has figured out who he is, except for one other moment in the story where she doesn't say Limdull to the Phyrexians. Otherwise, the story refers to him from then on as Limdull, not as the Raven Man.
Right.
Which I thought was great. Very cool. Interesting that, I'm curious if we will ever hear of him referred to as the Raven Man again. Maybe we will, maybe we won't, but in this case, he is Limdull. And then, honestly, at the end of the story, they I guess, try to be vague about it, because they're like, from the shadows, a golden-eyed man watched her go. Like, okay, are we trying to be...
You already said that it's Limdull. Plus, we already knew that it was the Raven Man.
Yep.
So...
Yeah, it's the end of the same story where you talked about the Raven Man a million times. So, like, are you really trying to be, like, cagey about, like, who could it be? Like, no.
I think they were just trying to be, like, descriptive as opposed to, like, saying his name again at that point.
I guess. Yeah, so thank you for the reminder of this this post-it. I appreciate it. So, yeah, all of you, please.
We'll get into my whole spiel now.
Yeah, yours starts here. And then,
oh, not here?
No, that is duplicated, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just here.
Correct.
Okay. So I'm just going to, so I have a lot of stuff written down here. So I'm just going to start to go through it, and if I feel that there's a spot that I need to elaborate on a little bit, then I'll stop and do so.
Yeah,
okay?
I might, if I notice it, I might call it out as well, just to be like, could you explain that a little bit better or whatever.
I can't see through my glasses.
That would be problematic if you're trying to read.
Well, they're not reading glasses.
Correct, but still, if you're looking through them to read. still could be problematic.
Yeah, that's why I'm leaving this down here while I read, because if I was putting my face any closer to it, I'd have to take my glasses off. So it says Liliana's warring with herself. Okay. There's a spot. I'll just go right to it, right?
Don't forget the dots are just like... So
okay.
These are quotes from the story, but we've removed certain sections that are irrelevant to what we want to actually talk about. So
it says she dismissed her class before they... Oh, it's missing a piece. So she dismissed her class and said... Yeah, it's missing a piece. I'm trying to figure out what...
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Okay.
But she basically then said to her class, because don't forget that she is a professor now.
Professor Onyx, although in this story they called her Professor Vess,
yes,
even though there's literally a card that's Professor Onyx with her on it.
Yeah, anyway. And the reason why she changed her name was to hide her identity.
But she changed it to Anna Iora first, and then to Professor Onyx, and then to Professor Vess, and then...
And they didn't talk about any of that.
No.
But that's not what I'm here to talk about.
Fair.
So she dismissed her class, but not before telling them that they were a disappointment to her, and they, you know, hopefully won't disappoint their other teachers as badly as she was disappointed by them.
Yeah.
So I wrote that down because that's a moment where you're like, oh, okay, is she not redeemed in this moment? Okay. So when I started by saying Liliana's warring with herself here, basically what I'm going to do is read off a bunch of these moments where she's tug-of-warring with herself. So she's on one side saying, okay, you know, I don't want to hurt people, and then the opposite, basically. So I'm going to go through and basically read these, and you can kind of visualize in your mind good Liliana and evil Liliana talking at each other and trying to convince the other one that they're right. So you've got evil Liliana doing that to her class, right? If she was this, you know, mindful, caring, loving person that she truly wanted to be, or is saying that she wants to be, or saying that she is now, right? Then she wouldn't have done that, right? She was disappointed with her class not fulfilling her her expectations, and instead of saying, well, maybe I need to do a better job of teaching them, she pushed the responsibility onto them and blamed them for sucking, basically. The next one is, unless their travels through the blind eternities brought them into contact with one of the people who blamed her for everything she'd ever been adjacent to. So Joe mentioned that line earlier.
Because I was annoyed by it, but...
So here, I'm going to talk about how it makes perfect sense. So this line is yet again that evil Liliana saying, no, good Liliana, listen to me, you know, because you shouldn't be taking blame for the things that you're responsible for. It wasn't really your fault, right?
Yeah, you were only adjacent to it. It's not
Right.
really your fault.
You were just kind of there. You weren't the cause.
Yeah, it's unfortunate how that works out sometimes, right?
The next line is, so this isn't a specific line. So this is talking about the imagery at the beginning and the honey. So how I want to incorporate that into this is by saying, when we started reading this story, and you started reading out the imagery, the beautiful imagery that's provided at the beginning of this story. Thank you so much to Shauna, because Shaunin.
Yes.
I'm sorry, Shaunin.
Yes.
Just incredible writing. Like, I don't know what else to say, honestly.
Super well done, yeah, agreed.
But I was sitting there going, is this mischaracterization of Liliana? Because why would she be feeling this way? Why would she be describing things this way? And it's not that she's describing it, right? It's the story is describing it. But the rest of the story basically is from her point of view, right? It's from her point of view, and or it's from the point of view of the audience looking in on her life.
Yeah.
So...
yeah, it's slightly omnipotent, but it's, like, focused on
right.
her.
So I was sitting there going, I don't like this. It's great writing. It's beautiful imagery. I love it as a story.
Yeah.
But it doesn't make sense here because it's not Liliana, right? But I then began to disagree with myself because I started to realize that what Liliana was doing was disagreeing with herself. What she was doing was she had these true moments. And so this story, I feel, is incredible. And the reason for it is because I feel this story fixes all of the problems in the Liliana arc that I have been complaining about since prior to War of the Spark. Okay? Every time that I've sat in this chair and complained about the characterization of Liliana, this story finally fixed it. And it's gonna be difficult for me to explain to you how. So I hope you've read the story. But if you haven't, I'm gonna do my best, right? So the imagery felt like it was coming from someone else, not Liliana, right? But who was it actually coming from? And if you've seen other episodes of JaAR in the past, particularly the ones where I've talked about trauma, which is a number of them, a lot of the more recent ones, there hasn't been enough of an instance for me to really be able to. But
what was the big one? Innistrad. The most recent one was the Innistrad Midnight Hunt stories with a lot of the Arlen Cord stuff was big on trauma. So that would be the most recent version of it for our reviews.
Yeah, but the better ones that really got into it more were still, I think, prior to that.
Oh yeah, I mean, absolutely. Like Ixalan, etc. were very good about that.
Yes. Yeah. But anyway, sorry. The imagery was said by Liliana's self. So if you've seen other episodes of JaAR where I've talked about trauma and parts work and stuff like that, then you probably already know what I'm talking about here, where the self is this sort of it's this sort of part of you that's not really a part, right? Because the concept of parts for trauma work is saying that the self is this sort of all-encompassing center, right? Whereas the parts are these sort of offshoots that occur when trauma occurs, right? So you become traumatized, and all of a sudden you have this piece of you shooting off in a different direction that exists to protect you from the trauma that occurred. So what happens there is that that piece is just a piece, right? Whereas the self is the whole person, and it's the side of you that is loving and understanding and is mindful, right? So if you want like descriptive words for that, endlessly compassionate, right? And that's the like healthy part of your psyche at that point, right? So the offshoots are really these little, they call them parts because they are really just like a split section. You know, it doesn't hold the capacities and the values and the strengths that the self holds. So there's the moments where the evil Liliana is arguing with the good Liliana. The good Liliana is the self, and the evil Liliana is the parts. But there are also lots of parts in this story. I shouldn't say parts again there.
Sections.
There are sections in this story where I can talk about, too, how parts aren't evil, right? And the important thing when you're doing parts work is being able to identify those parts and being able to communicate with those parts so that ultimately they can be integrated into that core self aspect, right? So the couple of things I've read already from here, telling her class how disappointed she is in them, and not because, well, here's how you could have done things better, in some kind of a constructive manner, just, you guys suck, and hopefully you stop sucking, right? and it wasn't because of me, right? Or not taking the blame for the things that she's done, and just saying, well, I was just there when these terrible things happened, and I was affected by it, but, I wasn't the cause. Those are these parts that have created from the trauma that happened to her in her life for these moments. The imagery, like I said before, the imagery is really, that's the portion that is being described kind of by the self Liliana, the good Liliana. She's only able to feel those things, notice those things, care about those things, because that self, that core piece, is always there. Even when those parts shoot off and you're acting like a total asshole, right? That core self still exists. It's still under there, right? Which is why redemption arcs work. Because you can be redeemed, right? You can, and it's not about capability here. It's about, there is a possibility, right? It does exist that you can redeem yourself. And the way to do it, what I'm saying here, I'm not saying there's only one way to go about that, but what I'm saying here is that the way to do that is to admit, take the blame.
Different mental health journey, but your first step is admitting that you have a problem, kind of a thing.
I mean, yes, that too, right? Because if she was always in the mindset of that evil Liliana, then she would never take the blame, and she would decide that there was nothing wrong, right? And she would just keep on living her life, negatively affecting every single person that she came in contact with and saying it was adjacent to her, right?
Yeah. That like passive language, as opposed to like, I caused these things, or like these things occurred near me.
Right.
Like,
that's like that's like such a fear of being wrong, right? Like, wow. And I that's like such denial, right? And I guess that higher level of denial comes from the severity of the things that she's done and not being able to accept it. I also wrote honey there because, again, the self is the piece of you that is able to notice how much sweeter the Gavany honey is and appreciate how much sweeter the Gavany honey is and miss it. The next line is it cat and mouse when the mouse pursues the cat? I don't need you, leave me. So those are two like separated lines, but they go together here, so I put them together. But this is an instance of, again, the evil Liliana talking. This is that false entitlement that I've spoken about in other episodes of JaAR, where she thinks she's better than him. And maybe it's that she's trying to convince herself that she's better than him because that's the only way she feels like she can escape his grasp. But convincing yourself of that is still that false entitlement, right? Thinking that you're better than others is a surefire way. It's like one of the main ass ways that you stay there in that evil Liliana headspace forever. I mean, you're too good to learn the truth, which is that good Liliana is the real Liliana and the true Liliana and the Liliana that deserves to be the one that moves forward, basically, and the one that is can form relationships with others and not hurt them, and can deal with grieving Gideon's death, and all of these other things, right? And so if the good Liliana can communicate effectively with the evil Liliana and get the evil Liliana to realize that thinking that she's better than the Raven Man is an evil thought, as opposed to knowing that we're the same. You, me, Joe, the Raven Man, Liliana, the Phyrexians, like, you know, that's a good, like, understanding that nobody is any better than anybody else is a good, like, jumping off point for that connection to be formed between evil Liliana and good Liliana, right? The connection between that part that broke off, that protective part, and the self. Come home to me, he said, the Raven Man. Escape the pointlessness and the monotony, you know, of, like, being the professor, and, you know, he was going into, like, detail, saying, like, the essays and blah, blah, blah. But he's like, you need novelty and power, you know, and all you desire can be yours at last, you know, at the low, low price of $19.99.
Or your soul, or any of these other, like, you know.
You know, only $60 shipping and handling. This was a moment where, so I also have peppered in here, moments where the Raven Man was manipulating her, gaslighting her, forcing his way into her thoughts, her life, her moments that she was having, her research of him, you know, all kinds of things. So that was one of the moments where it was like, here's this abuser coming in and gaslighting Liliana, right? Which is proof positive, right? That that she has experienced the trauma that is causing these two, like, warring aspects of her psyche. She references deaths she can't undo. He says, by counting yourself among them. That's another, you know, way of putting her down, dragging her into this, like, you can't survive the way you're surviving.
Yeah, he's commenting on the fact that she's, like, stagnating and dying there in that place where she is.
Right. That sort of the pointlessness, the, you know, which, I mean, textbook abuser dialogue, right? Think you're nothing. You're only something if you're with me and I'm helping give you power, and, you know, realize that the world, when it is, you know, peaceful and calm and joyful, is actually just pointless and monotonous and terrible, and, you know, you're only who you are supposed to be if you're within my control and clutches, basically.
Because it benefits him.
Right, of course.
Obviously. I mean, it's, you know, it leads to whatever his ends are, and whatever her wants are irrelevant because he is evil, right? Like,
so the next one is she awakens from the nightmare where she's seeing the Raven Man. She's anxious. She's clutching her blanket for safety, right? Because in that moment, she needs that safety. She's going to soothe herself, right, with a cup of tea.
Yeah, it literally says to, like, wash the taste of fear out of her mouth, essentially, in that place.
So she goes to soothe herself with a cup of tea, which I think the fact that it's a cup of tea that she goes for is just more proof positive of like how deeply entrenched this gaslighting goes, because because in the nightmare she's drinking tea. And so like she's just so susceptible to the implantation of thoughts into her mind that aren't her own, right? Because she's having this dream, this nightmare, this terrible nightmare of this monster, right? Controlling her. And she's drinking tea in the nightmare. And then when she wakes up from the nightmare afraid, what she does to soothe herself is get a cup of tea. Which, realistically, if you think about it, like looking in from the outside, that doesn't make sense. Because you're like, okay, the tea is now associated with this scary dream that you don't like being part of, and now you're trying to soothe yourself with the tea. That doesn't make sense. But it's like, it's just so, he's so in her head that if she was drinking tea in the dream, that's like the only thing that's going to come to her mind when she needs to soothe herself coming out of the dream. So she goes to make herself this self-care, which is super important, cup of tea, and then realizes ultimately that it wasn't a dream, because her tea, she had already had tea, and it spilled, and her favorite teacup was broken, lying on the floor.
And the tea was even still warm,
Yeah.
having spilled on the floor.
Yeah.
To give you an indication of like, you know, was it a dream? Was it not a dream?
Which, again, more gaslighting, right? It's so easy for him to only kind of show up when, or to like twist everything so that it looks like things aren't real, things may be real, I don't know, was I dreaming, was I awake? You know, it's typical gaslighting shit, right? But, I mean, her favorite teacup broken on the floor. You know, a metaphor for her life. Her psyche, you know, the fact that she has no control over her own life because this entity enters her mind and stays there and never goes away. Makes her drink tea to soothe herself when a moment before the tea was a part of what was scaring her the most. Her psyche has been negatively affected by this enough to affect her work day the next day, right? She goes to work and she's, you know, out of it. She's not really paying attention. You know, she's sucking at teaching, you know, which makes sense for all of us, right? As people who like, you know, it's typical for us to go to work and he's, you know, like earthlings, as opposed to like Magic the Gathering characters who their typical day is not, you know, well, I went to work, you know, and I wrote up a lesson plan, you know, their typical day is, you know, well, I pulled mana from the earth and then I, you know, fought some Phyrexians.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, I used the bones of my ancestors to give me enough power to melt the organic bits of these metallic creatures, raised them as my own, and took a javelin to the shoulder or whatever, and
Exactly. Amazing.
As opposed to most other people who, myself included, you go to work and you're like, wow, I am not having it today. You just like that's why you have a shitty day at work. Is like you just wake up one morning, maybe you were up late the night before for whatever dumbass reason, and you're the next morning
JaAR or something in the middle of the night.
Oh God, you don't have to call us out like that. Damn. Just because I have work in the morning. Yeah, like, you just have that day where you just get to the office, you're like, oh God, it's going to be one of those. All right, let's do it,
Right. Or, maybe you did have a terrible nightmare, right?
Sure.
Or something like that.
Sure.
But it's going to affect you so much more than somebody who is using the bones of their ancestors to fight the Phyrexians, right? Or you think it's going to affect you so much more, right? But then it doesn't.
Right.
Because, as I've said in older episodes of JaAR, trauma is trauma. Right? It does the same thing to the brain no matter what. No matter what it is, who it is, how it is. Like, your brain is damaged by it. And that damage is the same in my brain as anybody else who has complex PTSD. Right? The severity of that damage might be different depending on like how often it happened or something like that. But it does the same thing.
Sorry, I was just going to say it and that, like, it affecting her psyche, that if it was unclear and you haven't read the story, that's what leads to her saying to her students basically that they're, she's dismissing the class before they disappoint other teachers, like they disappointed her, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
Like, but it wasn't their fault. Like, they didn't do it. You're sucking right now. And so they're not able to learn from you, right? And so that's what it leads to. And then I don't think you wrote it down, so I hope I'm not like stealing something from you here. But when she leaves to go to Dominaria, right, she goes to the I guess the leaders of the school to ask for, or I guess the deans of Witherbloom in that case it would be, to ask for a sabbatical for a short period of time so she can go to Dominaria and figure this crap out. And because of her poor performance in class and in teaching.
Yes. The students.
Well, I was going to say, it led to the students complaining, it getting to the right channels where it was very easy for her. Like, I'd like to take a sabbatical. Yes, please get the hell out. Right? Like, take all the time you need to figure yourself out so that this crap can stop.
It seems like you need to,
right.
Yes.
So that was... I guess it worked out in the way that she wanted it to, but at the same time, like, she needed it. She clearly needed to be gone.
Yeah. But she didn't need to be gone for the reasons that the Raven Man said. That, she needs novelty and power, and, she has to leave behind this pointlessness that,
But I will say, it's good because it helps her... what ultimately comes out towards the end, and again, if you're going to get more into it, but that in the end, she even says she's going to go to back to doing what she loves. She's going back to Strixhaven, back to helping the students, back to helping them learn. And so she does literally leave to go, like, deal with that nonsense so that she can be better at her job, because otherwise... if she lets it, and that's a broad term for, mental health situations, but allow me for a moment, that it could take that away from her.
Right.
That thing that she loves and that brings her joy could go away because her trauma is affecting her now and affecting her performance at her job.
Right. And then that evil Liliana will sit there and mouth off and say how terrible her students are when it's really her inability to teach them. But yeah, that good Liliana is still there going, no, you love your students. You want to teach them. That's what you want to go back to when you're done fighting the Raven Man or figuring out what needs to get figured out so that these disturbances can stop. His visits accelerating in frequency until it was a rare night when she could sleep all the way through to the morning. Yeah, I mean,
same idea, right? Affecting her sleep and it's
and just again, textbook abusive behavior, right? Where it's like, okay, I'm going to just be so overbearing and interact with you so frequently that you just cannot escape my clutches, right?
Yeah, that even the restfulness of sleep, he is the one who controls whether or not she is even allowed to have it, or when, or how much of it, etc.
Right, and a lot of times when he visits her, it's when she's sleeping, or she'll wake up and realize that he was actually there, or, you know, it's like, so even when she's sleeping, she's not safe, right? She's never safe. That's why she's clutching that blanket when she wakes up.
And she even said later on something to the effect of, I know you prefer it when I'm asleep because then I can't fight back against you or whatever, something to that effect.
But realistically, she never fights back. She never does. Which they say in the story.
Yeah.
The Raven Man, time and time again in this story, says, you know, you will come back to me. You always come back to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's because she never fights back. Because she still isn't strong enough to do so. Because that war is still always going on. If this went on much longer, she would have to involve someone else. And that meant putting them at risk. No. She didn't do that anymore. Whatever this was, she needed to end it on her own terms. And she needed to end it alone. So this line is really, really indicative. I love this. This story is so good. So this line is really, really indicative of that back and forth in one, I mean, it's a couple lines, but just in that one little section of the story, it's like both at the same time, right? It's, you know, the self or good Liliana saying, you know, if this went on too much longer, I'd have to involve somebody else and that would put them at risk. And no, I don't do that anymore, right? And then
Gideon already died for that.
Right. And then, but then the part comes over and says, well, whatever this is, I need to end it on my own terms, and I need to end it alone. The self Liliana, the mindful Liliana, would know that's not how you fix things. You don't fix things by doing them alone and not involving anyone else and closing off to help and, you know, and then using the excuse that it's on your own terms, right? There is nothing in Liliana's life. Nothing. Actual nothing in Liliana's life that is on her own terms. Nothing. Because every shred of who she is the result of the things that have happened to her and the choices that she has made piggybacking off of the things that have happened to her, right? Whether they were good or bad. But she has, I mean, the whole point of this and it being able to be a redemption arc is the fact that she has no agency in her own life because her entire life has been controlled by the Raven Man, Nicolabolus, whatever his name is.
The demons?
Yeah, all the different demons.
Kothafed, Bells and Lockraz.
Right, I was thinking of Bells and Lock, but it doesn't matter. All of them, right? And just like, in every step she took forward, she was taking 15 steps back. So,
yeah.
I mean, this desperate, evil Liliana, this part, is saying, I need to do things my own way.
Because that's the only way she's ever really done it.
Well, no.
Well, sorry. No, you're right. My bad.
That's the way she's never done it.
Yeah. No, you're right. You're right.
So she needs that 100%. She's right in saying that's what I need to do.
Yeah.
But she's very wrong in how to go about it, right? Because how you go about that is by asking, good Liliana, how do I do this?
Yeah.
You do this by asking for help. So, what's next?
This one here, I think, right? She needed to end it along this last one.
Right. When he finds that her agency is possibly going to be improved, okay, by her looking up information about him, he gets very scared. And so he comes in and starts making her very aware of the fact that he's very aware that she's doing it.
Yeah, this is when she's looking at the old book in the Biblioplex.
Yeah.
Or books in the Biblioplex.
So, okay, you're trying to find out more about me? Well, I could tell you some stuff about me if you want.
Yeah, I'll show you exactly where to look.
I could help you find the book you need. And I'm totally going to do that. Because it's super important that you trust me, which is true, right? It's important that Liliana trusts him if he's going to continue to manipulate her and gaslight her and control her.
And so this could have been a strategic decision, right? Because he does give her the exact book that she needs to find out his name, how he got to where he is today, etc., and where he is contained, right? And so I guess, and you can correct me if I'm not getting this correct, but I guess he looked and was like, oh, she's looking up information. Eventually she will find out about me. And so I might as well just give it to her so that I curry a little bit of favor.
Curry a little bit of favor and still have control over it. And her.
On his own terms, she finds out about it. Sure.
Because that's what matters, right? He's the abuser in this scenario. Now, we know, as people who have read these stories, that Liliana is an abuser herself. And you can listen to the age-old saying of, hurt people hurt people. So,
yes.
There are these moments where she's perpetuating this cycle of abuse to herself, to her students, whatever, to Jace when they were in a relationship, And
then after they were in a relationship still.
Right. To Gideon when she's saying that he's a meat slab. That's maybe a little bit more playful version of it, but it's still the same sort of thing. It's this keeping people at arm's length by on purpose not caring as much about them as you need to so that you don't get hurt. Mm-hmm. It's that part, right? That evil Liliana saying, I need to protect you from this trauma. So I'm going to protect you from getting hurt by Gideon as well. Even though Gideon's not someone who's going to hurt her, I'm going to protect you from being hurt by Jace, even though Jace isn't someone that's going to hurt her, right? That part doesn't get that. That part is just a part. The whole Liliana, the self, knows this, but is struggling to, help the part understand those things, right? And is struggling for power in Liliana's psyche, right? And the hard part about all of this system, I guess, is that endlessly compassionate, accepting part, the self, is not going to ruthlessly fight for control of your psyche, because there's nothing about it that is ruthless. Ruthlessness only exists in those parts, because the self, ruthlessness isn't one of its qualities. Its qualities are all much more beautiful things than ruthlessness. Mm-hmm. It's not capable of ruthlessness. So I'm kind of on a tangent here. I gotta figure out where I am.
So you were here, so I guess you're here. And then I guess I want to talk about, I found a line that I thought was kind of interesting and that I thought kind of related to what you were talking about, but maybe it doesn't, in that one of the things that the Raven Man says to her when she's looking at this book is, or looking for information on him, is whatever you think you need to come to me. If you think that this armor of knowledge and ancient names, if you think that's actually going to help you against me, that's going to be an armor against me, you go right ahead, you look it up. And that's where it comes into play of like, I'll show you the book myself, right? If that's the armor you think you're going to come at me with, go ahead. It'll definitely help. And if he's letting her do it, it's not going to help.
Obviously.
Right? Like, it's just not.
Well, it's obvious to us, right? But it's not obvious to her.
Correct.
Because, again, he's so in her head. Even if it is obvious to her, because maybe it is, right? To an extent. It doesn't change her mind about what she's going to do. Yeah, I just liked the imagery, right? I mean, you talked about the blanket, right? Mm-hmm. But I liked the imagery of, even he is saying it's just armor, right? Like, what she is doing in seeking this information is not going to, it's not going to be like she's going to read this book and it's going to be like, his weaknesses, you know what I mean? Like, she's doing it to arm herself with that knowledge and with his name. And is that actually going to do anything? And I would argue that in this story, it did and it didn't. It did to keep Limdul out of the hands of the Phyrexians, but past that, it didn't really help Liliana in her, relationship, if you want to call it that. Like, it's a complicated one, but her relationship with Limdul, or with the Raven Man, like, it didn't end it. It didn't make it any better, right? Like, it didn't change it in any, like, meaningful way or possible way, but, like, so that's why he was like, whatever, this is the protection that you need. It's just like that little blanket she was holding. Yeah. It's the same thing. It's armor, but is it though? She was clinging to that safety blanket. Yeah. But, if he's in your head, a blanket don't do shit. to help you, right? Because there's no blanket inside here.
But the monsters under the bed, if you go under the covers, they can't get you.
Yeah.
That's how it works.
That's right.
You can't take this from me. I need to know that I'm safe at night.
That's why, your parents check under the bed before you go to sleep.
And in the closet and everything else.
Yes. Oh my gosh. That just reminded me of something that I don't know if I should say on camera, so I don't think I will.
Okay.
But we can talk about it after.
I would love to.
It's something my therapist said about herself, not about me.
Oh, okay. So that's why you don't want
Exactly.
I get it. Totally.
Let's see.
Here.
So, I wasn't actually finished with the last
I'm so
point
sorry.
I was making, but I got too off on a tangent that I lost my train of thought.
That's
so
right.
now I can come back to it. So the self isn't going to ruthlessly fight for control of your psyche against these parts, right? These parts have the capability of being ruthless. But the self is endlessly compassionate and accepting of those parts. So, and it's incapable of ruthlessness. So it's not going to do that. So, this tug of war is simply the self is pulling that rope. It's not actually yelling at the evil Liliana, right? Because the self doesn't yell. The self is accepting of the evil Liliana because she's not really evil. She's just a product of the bullshit that she's been through.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's what makes this story so great, because we're finally getting to see how Liliana redeemed herself instead of it just being tossed in our lap that she's redeemed now.
Yeah, trust us. We're just telling you.
But Gideon died, so now she's good. That doesn't make sense.
No.
So now we're finally being told the process.
And arguably shown, right? There's the show, don't tell. We're shown it. It's not just like, she's good now.
No.
Well, why? Wasn't she? She's good.
Right.
Okay, but nope, she's good. You should feel bad for her. Look, she's sad. What? I'm not wrong. That's what they did.
So now they're going back and they're explaining how she got from point A to point B. And it's not really back in time, right? It's forward in time. But now we're finally getting to see an arc. It's a redemption arc. That means that there's ups and downs and circumstances and options and choices and possibilities and all of these things that happen on this line that creates that arc that explain the process of how you get from being just evil Liliana to possibly being able to be good Liliana, right? He's trying to convince her to return to his clutches, basically.
Come home. Come back to me.
Right, as he feels that she's starting to leave them. To leave them?
Yeah, his clutches.
Oh, okay. Then he says that eventually she'll return to his clutches, since she always does, which is half true, because she does always, right? And it's half a manipulation.
Right, because if
telling her that is, again, implanting that thought of the cup of tea.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
Here's that cup of tea. It's there to soothe you. But in reality, it's one of the aspects of the nightmare, right? that then turns out to be real. That then turns out to be worse than a nightmare because it's your life. It's your real fucking life. Right?
Yeah.
Then, and the half that's true, you know, so he's not lying, right? The half that's true is, yeah, you have penetrated her mind to such a degree. You have gaslit her to such a degree. You have abused her to such a degree that she cannot escape you. Not that she won't. Not that she will make the choice to stay in your clutches, but that she will be incapable of escaping your clutches.
Yeah, and sorry, go ahead.
And again, I'll go way, way back. The thing that would help her escape those clutches would be to ask for help. To say, no, we're not doing this alone. We're doing this with help. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, so along those lines, that next point will be good as well.
Okay. Her not wanting to even think his name when she's in the library and she realizes that it's Limdal, right? But she specifically said, she had this moment where she said that she didn't want to think that name in her head, because if she did, she was afraid that that thought would somehow give him more power over her.
Yep.
Over her, but just more power.
I think it was in general. I think
it's just more power. Yeah. Like this inability to understand that like she's not manifesting more power for him by thinking his name one time, right? She's not, the only thing she's doing is cup-of-teaing herself, right? She's giving herself that thought again and again each time she thinks about him, which creates in your mind this network of neurons that fire that will make it that much harder for her to escape his clutches, because she will have reinforced and reinforced and reinforced and reinforced these thoughts of him and the way that he treats her and the things that he says to her, and the thoughts that he implants in her head, and the just all of these things are building and building and building more of a neuron network in her head that will be harder to break when she literally does the scientific aspect of parts work, which is literally taking those neurons that are firing in your brain and diverting them.
Or redirecting, or whatever you want to call it, right?
That's what parts work actually physically does to your brain, right? It takes neurons that are connecting and it moves them to connect to different ones. And that's how you physically go from being mentally unhealthy to mentally healthy. Physically. It's so fucking cool. There are videos of it. on YouTube and stuff that you can find. I highly recommend them because it's when you know that that's what's happening and you can see it happening, it's not just fascinating, but it's so cathartic to be like, okay, like, remember how I said she's incapable of escaping him unless she has help? That capability, that possibility actually exists, right? There's still some of it left, even though it's minimal. It still exists. And you can see that unfold in these videos where you get to look at actual brain neurons changing direction and firing with other neurons.
Really cool.
That will reverse, to a degree, that gaslighting that was making your neurons fire the one way that they were fighting or firing. And now they're going to do it a different way, which means you're going to think different thoughts. So instead of saying, oh, I need to soothe myself, what am I going to do? I'm going to go for a cup of tea. You'll say, I need to soothe myself, what am I going to do? I'll listen to music, or I'll go meditate. Or, whatever it is that isn't ever present in your nightmares. Right?
I didn't mean to psh before. I was trying to make a really crappy joke
Oh.
that is now 10 minutes past when it could have been made.
I'm so
but
sorry.
no, it's fine. I just wanted to make it a point of saying that I wasn't saying that in relation to what you were talking about.
Okay.
I was going to make the bad joke of who watches videos on YouTube anymore.
Oh.
Anyway, apologies for
Who
in
watches-
any way diminishing what you were saying, because that's not my goal.
Who watches videos that are this long on YouTube anymore is a good question to ask. So then I wrote down this line, but he had a name. And that meant he existed outside her mind. He wasn't her creation. Even if she was in some ways his. So she's recognizing in that moment that he has manipulated and controlled me to a point that I am in some way his creation. The result of who I ultimately am at this point is somewhat his creation. But he's not an illusion. He's real. Because this book is telling me who he is. He's not just a figment of my imagination. This part isn't just, I'm mad this one day. Or, oh, I have depression, I'm just sad, right? It's this real thing. It's those neurons firing that one direction. If they're firing that one direction, it means they also can fire another direction.
Ready?
Yeah. The monster that haunted her dreams, that had taken a frightened, powerful young girl and shaped her into a terrifying, borderline villainous woman, he was real. He could be stopped. He could be destroyed. She could cleanse this tiny bit of evil from the multiverse for Gideon's sake. There is so much to unpack here. The monster, right? He is the monster to her. He is the catalyst to the very first traumatic experience that she has, because even her brother falling ill and her trying to heal him wasn't something that traumatized her, because she was a healer. So she was going to go get the herbs, give him the herbs, and he would have gotten better, maybe. Who knows?
Yeah.
He would have gotten better probably, and everything would have been fine. But the first moment where she becomes traumatized is him cutting into her life and saying, you know, this medicine's not going to work to heal your brother. You need to destroy him.
Yeah, I mean, he obviously doesn't say that, but yes, yeah, where he's like, you got to use that dark magic. You know the powerful way to bring him back.
Right.
Try that instead. It doesn't work.
Yeah. And so her being, so his influence and her being the one then that facilitated destroying her brother, and him then being a lich, was that first instance of trauma. And then the rest of her life had been nothing but, because everything that was good in her life was something that she couldn't sit there and enjoy that honey in Gavany. She couldn't taste how good that honey was until she was no longer in Gavany, and she had taken some agency enough to say, I'm going to move to Strixhaven and change my life and change my name and try to become a different person, until she made that choice and was actually able to like sort of act upon it. She had no agency whatsoever. Then she had that little bit of agency enough to do that, right? And then she could appreciate the beauty of the imagery in the beginning of the story.
Yeah.
The taste of the Gavany honey that she wishes she could have.
Looking out at the beautiful Sedgemoor, which she said she thought was one of the most beautiful places when she was first there, and she still thinks it now as well.
Right. Yeah, so she was this frightened, powerful young girl. And it's great that they used both of those descriptors, right? She was frightened in that moment. She was desperate to help her brother, which made it that much easier for the Raven Man to prey upon her, right? But she was powerful. And the fact that she used the word powerful here means that she knows deep down that someday she can escape his clutches, because she knows she's powerful. Shaped her into a terrifying, borderline villainous woman. So that evil Liliana.
Yeah.
But it's not evil, right? It's just a part. And good Liliana, the endlessly compassionate, mindful, what else did I say? Accepting Liliana knows that. knows that evil Liliana isn't evil. She was shaped by the monster. And she was turned into a villain. He was real. He could be stopped. So if he was real, instead of just in her mind, then he could be stopped. But that's interesting, because even if he wasn't real, which he would be real even if he was only in her mind.
Right, I was going to say, he just might not be corporeal,
Right.
which is more what she's getting at, you know?
If he was just an illusion of hers, that doesn't make him not real, right? Because the pain that he causes is real. So even if he was just in her mind, he could still be stopped. And how do you do that? Ask good Liliana. Good Liliana says, you ask for help.
I like that the line used here was tiny bit of evil. Because she's identifying the fact that, like, this is not a Phyrexian level threat. This is not an Eldrazi level threat. This is not a Nicol Bolas level threat. But it's evil because she knows what it's done to her. She doesn't know, I would argue. I mean, I don't think it's ever stated. But she doesn't know if he is doing this to anyone else at any other point. So I really liked that she specifies tiny bit of evil. She has perspective on him, despite the fact that he would be so kind of all-encompassing for her because he's so ever-present.
Yeah.
But that she still is able to recognize it as the fact that in the grand scheme of things, and in all the things that she and the other Gatewatch members have come across in their lives, in their planeswalking journeys, no pun intended, that he is minuscule, but still something that she now needs or feels that she needs to deal with.
So I like that you made that point, because the good Liliana, the self Liliana, would think that, because the self Liliana knows no one person is better than anybody else, right? Which also means that even the most powerful people in the scheme of everything else don't actually have that much power, right? The self Liliana knows if he's focusing that much on just me, then he's not that fat of a cat. He's not that big of a fish. You know, he really is that one link in the chain, like he said. He wanted me to be a link too.
The next link, yeah. Yeah.
But a chain is long. It could go on forever. And there are limitless people, situations, actions, choices, and manipulations that are happening all at the same time along that chain that have nothing to do with her or the Raven Man. And self Liliana knows that. It's just that part Liliana doesn't always know that. That's why she sits there and says, Is it really cat and mouse? If you're chasing me, I'm better than you. Get out. Because she doesn't know. She knows. And for Gideon's sake, I guess that's kind of her way of taking some responsibility for Gideon's death, firstly, as opposed to just feeling guilty about it or feeling shame about it. Here she's actually taking responsibility. Again, she knows. She doesn't know. She doesn't take responsibility. She does. So I think the other half of how that makes sense is because Gideon is a white planeswalker. You know, he's inherently good. He's a leader. You know, he fights with his troops. And, you know, he sacrificed himself, which is something he would do probably for anyone, not just her, right? So he's just this inherently good person, which again is why she feels shame and guilt for the fact that he's now dead and she's alive, since he sacrificed himself to save her. So I think it is like her way of saying, like, if I can get rid of this evil and expel it from the world, it will be in service of the person that Gideon was. He had bid her? Mm-hmm. He had bid her to come home, where he first convinced her to listen to his truths that would have been kinder as lies. There's so much to this one, too. He wanted her to return to the place where he first traumatized her, because that would give him so much more control over her, because she would be so triggered in that place and in that moment that he could just swoop in and kind of do whatever he wanted to her at that point, right? And, you know, convinced her to listen to his truths. So not her truths, not the truth, right? His truths, which would have been kinder as lies. Because if I guess then it would be sugar-coated, or it would be less hurtful and less harmful. If that kind of goes back to the denial thing, right? If you can create that arm's length with your relationships, you know, that's a lie. That's a denial. That's a lack of truth. And that lack of truth means it's a lie, right? And so the lies would have been kinder, because there would not have been as much pain associated with that arm's length connection, as opposed to the very close-up connection that she actually dealt with him. The imagery of Vess estate is showing the cracks and the darkness of her choices and her life and her ability to now look upon her environment, or the environment that Vess Estates stands on, or is, you know, surrounding Vess Estate. And she can look upon that with healthier eyes. In that moment, she's good Liliana again. She's the self. She's describing how it looks, and she's thinking about, you know, she's having that mindfulness, that ponderance of, here's this, like, there used to be so much beauty here, and it's now this desolate wasteland, basically, because I destroyed it, more or less. You know, so the darkness and desolateness and terribleness of the landscape is a direct parallel to that of her life and her choices and her inability to make choices because her agency was taken. And, you know, but then the next sentence, I think, is you know, or the next section, or, you know, very soon after that, she's describing her, like, beautiful innocence that she had, and she's thinking about it fondly and missing it. And then literally, part Liliana comes back, because, of course, right? Some of you get what I mean. Part Liliana always comes back. And, you know, I'm just trying to find my place here,
This
sorry.
is where you were reading just now, Beautiful Innocence.
Then this side says, no, like, your life would have been meaningless. You would have been like arm candy to some rich guy, and, you know, you would have, like, been a highly decorated, you know, aristocrat, you know, but you wouldn't have been, you know, anything of consequence. You know, your life wouldn't have been meaningful. You know, you would have just been, you know, a bubble, right? That's what the actual words in the story said. So then it says, seeking power was you forging your own path. So, you know, part Liliana thinks that she's forging her own path by seeking power. This Liliana knows that that wasn't forging her own path. She never got to forge her own path, because her path was determined for her by the Raven Man and by, not Obnixilis, Nicobolus, and all the demons and everything else. You know, that original choice that she made all the way back then put her on such a different path that coming back wasn't going to be a thing. She would have just had to change direction from wherever she was at. And part Liliana was there that whole time, making it hard for her to do that. Because part Liliana thought, well, if I seek power, if I prove them wrong, if I make myself not a bauble, I'll be not a bauble. Okay, but all you're doing is feeding that monster that is controlling you. So you're not forging your own path. You are a bauble to him. He's picking you up and moving you around. He's chess piecing you, like Evercool talked about, you know. Be the hand that moves. Don't be the chess piece. And she's been the chess piece her whole life. You know, she tried to escape being the chess piece and then just fell right into somebody else's lap for them to move her, right?
Every time.
Every time. So many other people, right? And she's lived a long time, so I guess that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so what little bit of control could she cling to? Well, she could abuse Jace. You know, she could say, okay, Jace, you're a nice guy. I'm going to chess piece you because it makes me feel better about the fact that I'm a chess piece for somebody else. I just wrote, the house was unstable. That was a line. The house was unstable.
Because she noticed that it was sinking into the swamp, but...
it's just a metaphor for her being unstable, right?
Yeah.
Her, that constant back and forth, that constant war between the self Liliana and the part Liliana who, you know, is just making things difficult. If it pleases you, I won't do it again. If it harms you, I'll never stop. I loved that line because it's very... I got the feeling when you read that line.
Okay.
That I had when I was so angry about the fact that my life had been what it had been, and the fact that I had experienced the trauma I had experienced. That line is something I genuinely would have said, right? If it pleases you, I won't do it again. If it harms you, I will never stop. And
it's a good line.
All it is part Liliana. I mean, self Liliana isn't even in sight. She must have sunk into the mist, because that line could not be more part Liliana if her life depended on it, right? Because she doesn't get it. She doesn't see that the pain that she's suffered in the hands of the Raven Man is because of the pain that he's suffered at the hands of the other ring people. I don't know.
Sure, it works.
And the cycle goes on and on and on. And why does it go on? Because part Liliana doesn't go away. And part Liliana doesn't see. Self Liliana sees. And that's why doing that parts work, where those neurons are firing in a different direction now, is so important, right? Because that's the difference between the cycle goes on and on, that denial lives on and on, or the cycle stops. You no longer have to perpetuate that trauma and that abuse that you suffered, because now you know how to not. Because now these neurons are firing together. This part. The Raven Man says to Liliana, does any parent ask? Because he's blaming her for her choices and saying that her choices have ruined her. It wasn't him that ruined her, right?
Of course not. How could it be?
Because part Raven Man, part Lindell is there and doesn't know, doesn't see, doesn't take that responsibility for his actions, right? It's so hard because he can't see it. You know, and the fact that he says, does any parent ask? Yes. A good parent asks. A good parent lets their child be who they are. An abuser is a person who doesn't allow that, who doesn't accept their child, right? Good Liliana. Self Raven Man. Because Raven Man does have a self too. Everybody does. So self Raven Man knows that a good parent accepts and loves unconditionally their child. But part Raven Man yells louder. And he doesn't know. Final confirmation that her name Vess is indicative of her being a vessel. Yeah, they kept on like reinforcing that analogy of her last name Vess meaning vessel. That she is the vessel of the Raven Man. She's the vessel of the Onaki when she's got the chain veil on. She's the vessel of Nicol when he's manipulating her that day. She's the vessel of, you know, why do I keep not remembering his name? But it doesn't matter because all the demons,
I was
right?
going to say, you were thinking Bells and Lock.
Right.
But yes, all of them.
Because that's the one I really know anything about.
Sure.
So it doesn't actually matter because she's got all the other ones too.
It's all four.
But yeah, Vess meaning vessel, you know, so, and this is something that I can again say harkens back to some of our older JaARs where I say like a name means a lot, right? Sometimes, with certain stories, I will look up names. With these stories, not as much because Magic the Gathering makes up names a lot of times. But sometimes there are names that I can look up and it will give me clues as to who the person is, what kinds of things they do, because a lot of times in real life, that's a little bit less true, right? People can change their names. People can do things on purpose to try to avoid living up to their name, things like that. But in a story, the reason why somebody is named what they're named is for a reason, right? So Liliana Vess was a way of indicating to you from the get-go, when they first created the character, that she was going to be a vessel. Enjoying the moment of connection. But since, okay, so This is the part where Liliana is like communing with the land.
The swampland, literally.
Yeah. And she's enjoying the moment. She's enjoying feeling that connection and that love that she's receiving back from the land that remembers her.
Her home, her ancestors.
The energy that runs through that area and runs into her and runs back in. You know, this sort of like circular exchange of energy. You know, she's enjoying the moment of feeling that. Again, self Liliana knows. But since when had she sought safety? That's part Liliana. Saying, hey, wait a minute, you're not allowed to enjoy things. You're not allowed to feel connections. Arm's length relationships only. That's how you stay safe. That's what part Liliana says.
You don't need that blanket. You don't need that armor.
Right. Right. She took a breath, self Liliana, and walked toward the wrongness. What a great aspect of this story. That's, again, another section that's so small, but you go self, part, self. You know, right back to it. And that's what it's really like in real life sometimes, right? It's really like, here's this mindful, loving moment. And then part shows up and shits on it. And then you gotta come back. And sometimes you can, and you can do it well, and you can do it quickly, right? Other times you can't. But this was a moment where she was really enjoying that connection and that love that she was feeling. And then, and that connection with nature, which is also another like mindfulness thing, right? And then part Liliana comes in and says, oh, no, you don't. You know, you're not safe unless you can't even feel it. You know, if you love what you're feeling, it's no. You know, I don't know, whatever. You know, but then right back over here, she takes a deep breath and she walks toward the wrongness that she's feeling. And that's what you do in parts work. You recognize part Liliana and you walk toward her, right? You walk to her wrongness because she doesn't know. And that's how she'll learn. You walk toward her and you show her that love and you give her that connection and that joy that you're feeling from that love and connection. And you give it to her so she can feel it. So that someday, because not right away, sometimes it can be quick. It depends on who part Liliana is. But you learn about her. You provide her with that love, with that acceptance, with that connection, that mindfulness. And she, or the concept, the hope, is that she eventually learns that arm's length connection isn't a connection. That she's not protecting you by keeping you at arm's length. from others or from nature or from whatever it is. Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
If it were as alive and terrible as it felt, the wrongness, okay? If it were as alive and terrible as it felt, it had to know she was there. Better to face it head on than to hide from it like the child she would never be again. So again, so good. The writing, oh my God. But it's not just the writing, right? It's the realism of how indicative this is of trauma history and trauma work, right? You know, and it's a direct parallel to the Phyrexians. You know, it's an analogy. They're saying, okay, the wrongness is the Phyrexians, right? But she's walking right toward it. She's gonna, if that wrongness is alive, so if that wrongness of the part Liliana is alive, and it's as terrible as it feels like it is, it has to know you're there. Part Liliana doesn't know. Doesn't know self Liliana is there. So self Liliana has to show part Liliana that self Liliana is there. Better to face it head on than to hide from it, like Liliana's been doing this whole time. Changing her name, running away to Strixhaven, being a teacher, which is so the opposite of just how she is, who she is, you know, and trying to just escape the guilt and the shame that she feels for Gideon's death, and trying to escape the Raven Man. And all that does is make her feel it more. But if she had that help, and if she did the parts work, she could go right toward that pain, that shame, that guilt, that denial, the arm's length relationships, right? And show herself Liliana to her part Liliana. So her part Liliana can know some of what the self Liliana knows, which is that she's perfect. Liliana is perfect, right? And so part Liliana feeling shame and guilt and or the opposite, and thinking she's better than everybody, or thinking she's going her own path when she's cutting everybody else out of her life. Self Liliana can teach part Liliana that that's not true. That's not the truth, right? That's the Raven Man's truths. That's not her truth, and it's not the truth. This is her truth and the truth.
This is the next part.
Not quite willing to extend another thread of magic outward to verify that the wrongness remained. So that's that arm's length thing again, being too afraid in that moment to make that true connection and really get vulnerable and really try, because she's afraid of the wrongness getting her, right? Making her unsafe. And she doesn't have the blanket to clutch onto. She doesn't have the armor. And those things, even though they're fake, they don't actually protect her. And again, you know, part Liliana, those things don't actually protect Liliana, right? Those things that part Liliana thinks are for protection don't actually protect her. What she'd touch did not give the impression of being something that would so easily let go. So that's another moment that I think, again, it's describing the Phyrexian situation, right? But it's, again, a perfect parallel for this, where you're saying, okay, she had touched that wrongness, and it didn't give her any impression that it was going to be something that was going to be easy for her to let go of. That trauma that she experienced that first day with the Raven Man when she was trying to save her brother is not something that is going to heal easily. She's going to have to work at it, and it's going to take a long time. Because part Liliana always comes back. Just like the Raven Man said, she always comes back. So it's not about expelling her and running off to Strixhaven and changing your name. It's about letting her see. It's about it had to know she was there. Part Liliana has to know self Liliana is there. And self Liliana is a real blanket, is a real suit of armor. She's the one who makes you safe. She's the one who takes care of you when the Raven Man doesn't. When Belzenlock doesn't. When Nicol Bolas doesn't. When your other demons don't. When the Onaki don't. When your brother, who's dying, doesn't. Because he can't in that moment. So, self Liliana is the one who protects you, not those arm's length connections and those moments of thinking that you're better than everybody else and forging your own path alone, when in reality all that equates to is playing right into the Raven Man's hands and not seeking help when the one thing you need the most is help. Okay. The figures arrayed behind her had been somehow twisted out of true with their own natures. Patched together from dead and living flesh at the same time. And the dead flesh did not kill the living, and the living flesh did not resurrect the dead. So again, that's another one of those perfect parallels, I feel like, where the description of the Phyrexians is a perfect parallel to this back and forth between the part and the self Lilianas, where twisted out of true with their own natures. So that's a good metaphor for trauma, right? Your own true nature is self Liliana, right? And you've been twisted out into part Liliana. And then you're patched together. These two almost dueling pieces, right, are patched together. The dead and the living. And the living cannot resurrect the dead, and the dead isn't killing the living. You're just constantly in this tug of war. Where basically you fixing that or helping that situation is the parts work. So it's making part Liliana aware that self Liliana is there to be that safety blanket, to be that suit of armor, so that part Liliana can become more vulnerable and explain to self Liliana what part Liliana needs. And then when self Liliana understands what part Liliana needs, then because she is this endlessly accepting and compassionate safety blanket person, right, she can come and put the blanket on. And part Liliana then doesn't need to scream from the mountaintop that she's better than everybody else and that she needs to protect you by keeping everybody at arm's length, and that, she's going to do things her way, and that if it pleases you, she'll never do it again, and if it harms you, she'll never stop. She won't need to do that anymore because she'll have the safety blanket of self Liliana. And then dismantled and disassembled into something more efficient than the sum of its parts.
Technically that says reassembled, but...
Oh, what did I say?
Disassembled.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Just...
That's a completely different meaning. So dismantled and then reassembled into something more efficient than the sum of its parts. So to me, that line, again, was like very indicative of parts, right? It literally says parts, sum of parts. So, part Liliana is representing the multiple parts that you could have. And so you as a person are more than just the sum of your parts, because self Liliana exists and is not a part. Self Liliana is always there. Because the self is essentially what your psyche is if you've never been traumatized, right? If Liliana's life was completely untouched by the Raven Man or anyone else, in a vacuum, but not reality, right? She would only be self Liliana. But everyone has parts because everyone has had traumas in their lives. Again, trauma is trauma, so the severity of that trauma doesn't mean that you haven't had a trauma, because everyone has. But these parts aren't you. They're just part of you. That's why they're called parts.
Yeah, exactly.
they dismantle you and then reassemble you. You dismantle them, reassemble them. And the mentality of the parts is that their way is more efficient, right? That their way of doing things is better than the way that the self would do things, right? Those arm's length relationships. Those moments where Liliana is saying, I'm better than you, Raven Man, so get out, because she thinks that that's empowering for her. And that's what she needs is empowerment, right? But that's a false empowerment, because reality means that you're not better than anybody else. And Liliana knows that. But the parts think that the way that they do things are more efficient. And the self needs to say, the way you do things is less efficient. I know, and I have more resources than you. Because you're a part. So your resources are finite. They're limited to the date and time that the Raven Man showed up and made you think that you should turn your brother into a lich. That's all the resources that part Liliana has. Self Liliana has everything. Has limitless possibilities.
And so last but not least, which
this
is a very weird way to end it. It's just that there weren't a lot of other lines from this point to the end. Yeah.
She would still be Liliana Vess. But the part of her that loved her students, loved Sedgemoor, grieved for Gideon and for her brother, that part would fade mercifully away. So there's another moment where part Liliana has control of Liliana's psyche. She's saying it's merciful. That arm's length relationship thing. It's merciful that the pain I feel from being, from losing my brother, from losing Gideon, from being controlled, it would be merciful to not have to see my students again, care too much about them, and then never see them again. Part Liliana is still Liliana. Part Liliana is not part Joe, or part Raven Man, or part, whoever. Part Liliana is still Liliana, but she doesn't know that the pain that she's feeling from grief and from, her students growing up and moving on and becoming successful because of what she taught them, but her then, as a result, never getting to see them again. And, part Liliana doesn't know that those things are important. Part Liliana is trying to run away from them. Change her name. Become a professor.
Hide away on Strixhaven.
Right. Even though self Liliana knows that the relationship she had with Gideon means so much. because it wasn't really the relationship she had with Gideon, right? It was the fact that he was willing to give away his life to protect hers. That's a connection that couldn't be arm's length if you had the longest fucking arms on the planet, right? If your arms were as long as Emrakul's tentacles.
It's pretty big arms.
You could not make that connection arm's length. It would be longer still than those arms. And so self-Liliana knows that. But part Liliana is saying, whoa, whoa, whoa. This is too painful. The shame, the guilt, the just like trying to convince myself that I am worthy. Because part Liliana doesn't think she's worthy. She doesn't know. Self Liliana is who knows that not only is Liliana worthy, but that everybody is. Gideon was worthy, Jace was worthy, Liliana is worthy, the Raven Man is worthy. Each individual Phyrexian is worthy. But if they're peeling off pieces of themselves to replace it with mechanical parts because they're trying to become more efficient, right? Like I said in one of the other quotes, you know, I want to be more efficient so that my parts add up to more than just the whole or whatever. Like, they're in this mentality. They don't think they're worthy. Which is why Liliana will sit there and say, she'll tell the Raven Man, I'm better than you. Because she wants to believe it. She wants to think and know that she's better than him, but she's not. Because nobody is. And self Liliana knows that. But part Liliana just cannot figure it out. Right? She's sitting there saying, this grief, this endless, meaningless suffering is for nothing. And I can't take it. So I won't. But you have to. You have to take it. Because part Liliana needs to know you're here. To be that blanket. To be that suit of armor. To protect them from that grief, that pain. And those connections that are longer than arm's length are what will make part Liliana believe you, will make part Liliana understand that those first direction firing neurons aren't what you want to be firing. You want them to divert. Part Liliana will understand when self Liliana explains it and protects her and comforts her and loves her and accepts her instead of saying, you're the evil Liliana, be gone. Accepts her. That's when neurons aren't going to be this direction. They're going to go this way. And that's how you fix it. That's how you do it. And I hate that I'm saying the word fix because it's not. Self Liliana knows that it isn't broken. The end.
Okay. Well, I thank you, first of all, for all of that, because it's a lot of really cool and good information. And I want you all to say, if you learned something today, if you have questions, leave them in the comments.
Yeah.
Let us know. Let us know what you learned. Let us know what you liked. Let us know what you agree with, as with any JaAR that we do. What you agree with, what you disagree with. What did you think of this story? Did you like it? Did you dislike it? Did you hate it? Did you love it? I want to know. We want to know. That's what the comment section down below is for. Fill it up. Write a whole paragraph. I don't care. We will read every word.
Especially if you hated the story, because I really want to know if you hated the story. And I would be really curious as to why. Because this story is amazing in my mind. And like I said, it's the one story that fixes the problems that we've been experiencing for a long ass time at this point with the stories, with Liliana's characterization. I think this is this is a pillar. It's everything. It holds all the weight.
Okay. So there you go. So is it fair to say then that you're looking forward to the next Liliana story because of this?
Yes. And I can say that I'd be looking forward to her story arc in the future indefinitely. Because as much as I hated Liliana before,
a lot.
This is what we needed to make us understand that you don't need to hate Liliana. Because Liliana isn't a villain, right? She is perfect. Self Liliana knows that. Okay. And now we do too. Because somebody finally wrote it and made it real. And according to Liliana, if it's real, it can be stopped.
I feel like you went the other way on that one. So, hey everybody, I mentioned it at the beginning, but that was 2.5 hours ago. So I will remind you again, if you are enjoying the things that we're doing on this channel and you want to see more, first of all, with anything that we do, if you have feelings, opinions, etc., you want to see more like it, you want to see less like it, that's what the comments down below are for, in addition to everything else that we talked about. But I don't care how many viewings it took you. If you got this far in the video, obviously thank you so much.
Yes.
Firstly. Secondly, we really hope you enjoyed. And third, I think that being able to read a story, get the symbolism involved, and be able to allow a character to have the redemption arc that we have now seen.
And that we now can prove that she deserves. And deserved all along, despite the fact that we didn't know that.
Is a great way for all of you to join us as we show off our...
#Worthos Pride.
Usually you're not the one to say stuff right before I do the thing. I liked that. It was new and different and fancy. So yes, we will be back, hopefully, no promises, but hopefully on Monday or maybe Tuesday with with the next episode of JaAR, not Tuesday. Anyway, we're going to try to do 2 episodes next week. We have a convention this weekend, so if you're going to be at the Mid-Hudson Comic-Con in Poughkeepsie, New York, look for us. We'll be there.
It's going to be exciting.
Yes, so come say hi. We would love to see you.
I may or may not have a cool Magic the Gathering cosplay.
It's true. May or may not. You'll have to come and find out. Or just follow us on socials, links down in the description box below, and we'll post pictures and stuff too. But regardless, but we will be back with more JaAR as soon as we possibly can. We have, many more stories to go, so stay tuned for that. Don't forget, we are live every Monday and Friday on this channel at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. We would love to have you there. You can come into chat and talk to us about what you thought of this episode. No, nothing is off topic, If it's too personal, we'll let you know. But nothing is off topic as long as it's respectful in our chat, so you're more than welcome to come in. I don't care what we're doing at the time. You can talk about whatever the hell you want. So, and we'd love to have you.
And if you are there and you have a fear that what you want to talk about might be a little out of line or might make certain people uncomfortable or something like that, that can be a subject that we broach.
Yeah, you can ask, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, you can come in and say, hey, I watched such and such video, you mentioned this, I'd really like to go more in depth here, you know, is that going to be okay during this, is it not? And we might say, oh, sure, and talk about it, and then come to a point where we feel like it's teetering the line and we need to shut it down and continue talking about it, you know, direct message or whatever. But don't be afraid to bring something up because you think it's going to be not popular that you've done so. I am not the type of person who lives my life that way. And I'm not going to tell you that you should be.
Sure.
So I would say don't be afraid to bring something up if you think it's a little bit iffy. You know, maybe ease into it. We can have a bit of a discussion where we're talking about it instead of just going right into talking about it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So that there can be preparation or measures taken to make sure that everybody can feel safe and respected while at the same time feel like they can be vulnerable and be able to talk about things that aren't just safe and meaningless. You know, we can also talk about things that are meaningful and deep and scary. We can. There's a way to do it. So please don't feel like you can't do that.
Sure. And then in addition, please don't forget we also have other channels, as I mentioned, links in the description down below. But that is going to be the end of this particular episode. We will see you in the next one. And so, for now, from us here at the Geek for All family of channels, I have been Joe.
And I'm Amy.
And as we always say, in whichever video of ours you watch next, we will see you all next time. Thanks, everybody.